Morning, guys. One of the greatest things I've learned on my path to personal growth and development is that positivity, positive thought energy equals wealth, whether it's mind wealth, happiness, freedom, success, the peace we feel, and negativity equals poverty. And it seems like these are just universal laws that are manifested everywhere. So having a negative mindset, allowing negative things to overtake us and to have us respond in negative ways, will only continue to attract poverty-like things in our life. Now, that's not to say that things that we can't control happen to us, or that, people that don't have a lot of money are necessarily always negative. It just means that we have control of our thoughts, and it's powerful if we start to fill our minds with positive thought energy. You could start to feel the difference so that no matter what happens, you can have your peace and happiness. Have a great day, everyone.
I've been making espresso videos for 7 years now, and I thought it would be fun to look back on the first 7 espressos that I've made over the next 7 days, so you can enjoy, maybe have a few laughs, and hopefully also get inspired. Here we go. So today, let's look at the first espresso video I've ever made on 50 Cent.
Good morning, Believe Nation. If you're worried that you're not thinking big enough, that you're not acting big enough, that you're not doing enough, then I'm going to share an inspiring clip from 50 Cent that I think will help.
I'm a rapper, an entrepreneur, a person that has doesn't see limitations. I'm a person who has high expectations for myself. And when I actually start to look at some of the things that I've accomplished, and I become a little more interested in my legacy, like what people remember me as, is what made it more important that I involve myself in philanthropy. Because the people that resonate the strongest in their absence have done more for people when they were actually in good positions.
This is a great clip, and one that really resonates with me, because I'm constantly questioning myself. I'm thinking, am I doing enough? Am I thinking big enough? Do I have limiting beliefs that are holding me where I am? Are my expectations for myself high enough? Can I raise that bar, and how do I do it? And I think a great way to think about that is, what's my legacy going to be? You want to think about, how are your kids going to remember you, and your grandkids going to remember you? What's going to be written in the newspapers the day you die, right? What's that lasting memory, that lasting impact that you want to have on the world after you're gone? And at least for me, it makes me think like, I gotta do more. I gotta raise the expectations I have on myself, because I want my legacy to be something great. And in order for that to happen, I gotta raise the bar, increase the standards that I put on myself, increase my own expectations, think bigger, because I wanna have that positive legacy. So the question of the day for you today is, what's the legacy you wanna leave? I'm really curious. Leave it in the comments below. What's that lasting mark that you're gonna put on this world, and how are you gonna go out and start achieving that today? Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video and you want to see more, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll see you again tomorrow morning for another shot of entrepreneurship to kickstart your day. Continue to believe, and I'll see you soon.
If you want another amazing 50 Cent video, check it out right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
He's sold over 30 million albums and has won several awards, including a Grammy. He has a shoe company, water business, film production companies, and a headphone line. He's 50 Cent, and here are his top 10 rules for success.
Morning, guys. One of the most common things I often hear when I talk to family, friends, or just anybody in general about this path of developing our greater selves is that it's very difficult, it's very hard, especially when Some of us will try. We'll try early in the morning, have our good routine where we fill our minds with positive thought energy, and then we'll get on to our day and meet our jobs, meet our situations, our circumstances, and things will happen, negative things will happen, and immediately we'll be put back into our place where we were before our morning routine. And so I kind of laugh at this because we have to laugh. It's a process. It's funny in the sense that, we build ourselves up and then we get, brought back down. But we have to understand that it's a process, and it's a never-ending process, and it's going to happen. And that's the whole point of it, is that you got to get back up and you got to continue, restart the day, and keep at it. Have a great day, everyone.
Want to be happy? Build a life, not just a business. Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and this channel was created to help you overcome the #1 challenge that is holding you back, a lack of belief in yourself. You watch these videos because you know there's something more inside you too. You've got Michael Jordan level genius at something. So today, let's live your best belief life and get some incredible motivation from the one and only Dr. Myles Munroe.
That is, the wealthiest spot on this planet is not the diamond mines of South Africa. It's not the oil fields of Iran or Iraq. It's not the uranium mines of the Soviet Union. It's not the oil wells of Iraq. The wealthiest spot on this planet is not the sea food of the oceans. But the wealthiest spot on this planet is right in your neighborhood. It's the cemetery. If I could mine the cemetery like you mine gold, I would be the wealthiest man on the planet. Why is the graveyard so wealthy? Why is there so much treasure in the cemetery? Why? Because buried in the cemetery are dreams that were never fulfilled. Books that were never written, ideas that never became reality, visions that were never manifested. There in the graveyard are paintings that were never painted, songs that were never written, books that we'll never read. In the cemetery are great manufacturing plants that were never built. In the cemetery are sermons that were never preached. The cemetery is pregnant with unused success. Buried in the cemetery is treasure that makes God weep. My greatest fear tonight is very simple, and that is I am afraid that most of you in this room and in this auditorium tonight, and perhaps watching this program, you are going to add to the treasure and the wealth of the cemetery. And that makes me very sad. Because buried inside of you are dreams that you still carry, ideas that God planted in your heart that you still haven't done yet, paintings that you've been planning to paint, and books you've been thinking about writing, and paintings you keep procrastinating about. And what I'm so concerned about is we'll never see your painting. We'll never sing your song. We'll never read your book, and we'll never operate in your business, and we'll never experience the invention that you keep procrastinating on. I trust that you will rob the graveyard of your treasure. Yes. I pray that you will disappoint the cemetery. I pray that when the morgue gets your carcass, it'll be empty. Treasure. What do you call this massive treasure that's in every cemetery? It's called potential. Write the word down. Potential. Everybody say it. Potential. Say it one more time. Potential. Why is this called potential? Well, potential, I want to define it for you one more time. Potential is untapped power. Potential is unused ability. Are you ready? Potential is dormant strength. Potential is hidden power. Potential is all you could be, but you haven't become yet. Potential is how far you can go in life, but you haven't gone yet. Potential is who you really are, but we haven't seen you yet. Potential is everything you could be, but you haven't become it yet. Potential is all you can do, but you haven't done yet. In essence, potential is never what you've done. Please make a note of that. Potential is never what you've done. It's always what you could do, but you haven't done yet. In essence, whenever you've done something, it's no longer your potential. Therefore, potential is everything that is yet unused, that is still within you. I am convinced that God has buried in every human being, all 5.2 billion of us, treasure that is yet to be tapped. Let's put it this way. If potential is not what you've done, but what you could do, then whatever you've done is no longer your potential. Therefore, you should never be impressed by what you've done, because if you are impressed by what you've done, it'll stop you from doing what you could do. The greatest enemy of progress is your last success. The greatest threat to moving ahead is getting excited about where you are. Whenever you feel like what you've done is the best you could do, you just died. Come on. No matter what you've done, if it didn't kill you, there's more left. As long as you're breathing, God got something else left inside. Until you are gone, you're still pregnant. Because God sent you here, and no human being came to this planet empty. I repeat, no human came to this planet empty. You came here loaded, and you came here to make a deposit, and deposit you will make. And if you don't make, you are a generational thief, because you stole from the next generation. My Lord. The next generation is supposed to benefit from what you came to deliver. And if you settle down on what you've done and not do what you could do, then you rob them of what you came to leave for them to enjoy. And that is why you should never allow what you've done to stop you from doing what you could do. No matter how great what you've done is, don't park. Tell your neighbor, I feel my baby moving. Now, I want to talk to you about the best kept secret. And the best kept secret is a strange secret, because only one person has it. And the secret is about you. There's a secret about you that nobody knows except the one who manufactured you. There's information on you that has been kept, because if it was ever given to anybody else, they won't believe it. First, I want to deal with a little issue before I go any further. I want to talk about how to be set free so you can discover your secret. The key to freedom is knowledge. Just write these principles down. The key to freedom is knowledge. And the key to knowledge is truth. The key to knowledge is truth. And the key to truth is the manufacturer. I repeat, there's a principle. The key to truth is the manufacturer. Let's talk. The greatest enemy of man is not sin. The greatest enemy of man is not Satan. The greatest enemy of man is ignorance. Ignorance is the cause of all destruction. As a matter of fact, we blame so many things on this entity that we call devil that we've become irresponsible lately. We eat bad, get sick, and then blame it on the devil. Uh-oh. Ignorance is the major enemy of man. God says, my people perish, or they are destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. And because they have rejected knowledge, I must also reject them, and they cannot represent me. And then he goes one step further. He says, and I must also reject their children. Here's the point. If you don't know anything, and you teach your children what you know, then your children is as smart as you. Write this down. All I know is what I've learned. Say it with me. All I know is what I have learned. One more time. All I know is what I've learned. Now you got to let that sink in for a minute. No matter how many books you bought, you only know the ones you read. Don't look now if someone's looking at you. Some of you bought books last year and haven't cracked the pages yet. And you show people your library and try and impress them with what you don't know. You bought videotapes and haven't burst the plastic on it yet. You bought cassette tapes and haven't listened to them yet. You see, buying information doesn't give you revelation. Now here's what God says about that. He says, because you have rejected knowledge, I must reject you. It's impossible to reject something that was not available. Therefore, your ignorance was a decision. 90% of the knowledge you need is right in your house in a book you never read. That's good. Every time you pass a library, knowledge incriminates you. God says you are perishing because you lack knowledge. So don't blame it on the devil. Don't blame it on your mother-in-law. Don't blame it on your teacher. Don't blame it on the school system. You don't need a teacher to learn. Oh, come on, say something, Minnesota. Some of you are blaming it on the education department. You don't need a professor to make you read a book. I'll never forget the day when I walked on the premises of the university I attended. I walked into my first class, freshman, and here comes this professor. And I was so excited, all my books, and I sat there ready, eager to learn. And I saw this great bank of reservoir of knowledge walk into the room. And I said to myself, I'm going to learn so much from this great man. And he stood there for 5 minutes and says, good morning. I'm glad that you are here today. Our course of study shall last for this semester. You have 5 books to read. Tonight I want you to take the first book, read the first 5 chapters, write a paper. I'll see you tomorrow. Where are you going? I just paid $2,000 to come to this school. Come back here, preacher. And he left. And I got mad. And I said, wait a minute, I just paid $2,000 tuition and another $1,600 for room and board, and I bought all these books for hundreds of dollars, and the man spent 5 minutes in the class. I went to the library and realized that I was going to be spending over $57,000 for someone to tell me, go and read a book. Come on, clap. You know it's true. Knowledge is the key to freedom. But the key to knowledge got to be checked carefully. I used to think that knowledge was power. That's not necessarily true, because you can learn the wrong thing. Jesus said the only thing that can set you free is not knowledge, but knowledge of the truth. It's dangerous to learn the wrong thing well. Some people are experts in error. Come on, talk to me. So knowledge doesn't mean you're smart, because what you may have learned may not be true. And the most dangerous thing for a person to have is knowledge that is erroneous, that they believe is true. The most dangerous human being I've ever met is one who has zealous error. People with zeal who are wrong. And it's the cause of great tragedy in our humanity and in our history of man. Most of the problems in our past are results of zealous, erroneous people. People who had information that was erroneous, it was wrong, but they thought it was right and they were zealous. Hitler, for example, believed that everybody else was subhuman and the Aryan race was the only true human race. And that error made him massacre millions of people. The Crusaders, who were Christians, were under an error, and they killed thousands and thousands of people all over Europe because they had a theological error and tried to force people to come to Jesus with the sword. And then you used to preach against speaking in tongues, and you used to rebuke people who did it, and now you're doing it more than they. Don't look at me so funny. Some of you used to have scriptures to prove it was from the devil. Look at you now. It's amazing what we do with error. We defend it vehemently. That's why Jesus said, knowledge of the truth shall set you free. Not just knowledge, but the truth. Now I mentioned to you that truth, the key to truth is who? The manufacturer. What do I mean by that? The manufacturer is the only one who knows the truth about his product. Let me try it one more time. The manufacturer is the only one who knows the truth about his product. Everybody else is experimenting. Everybody else is guessing. And everybody else has opinions. The manufacturer knows the truth about his product. That's why you shouldn't get information from anyone else except the manufacturer. Don't even believe the retailer, because he's in business for sales. Lord, help me tonight. That's why I don't trust humans to tell me who I am. Don't depend on customers' experience to determine the value of a product, because some customers don't know how to use it. You all are slow here tonight. Many of us have literally allowed people to talk us out of good products because they abused it and it didn't work for them. Not because your marriage didn't work doesn't mean marriage doesn't work. Hello. You just didn't know how to stay married. You didn't follow the manufacturer's manual. You didn't follow the specifications. Hello, somebody. So if the toaster didn't work for you, that doesn't mean the toaster ain't no good. You just plugged it in wrong. Are you understanding me? The truth about a product is only hid in the mind of the manufacturer.
There's some things that you can do that are based.
Guys, today we're introduced to Gary Vaynerchuk in our top 10 rules for success. And he opens up the first part by giving us a quote that he strongly believes in, and I totally believe in too. And it is that the idea that ideas are great, we all have ideas, but execution, making those ideas come to life, is the real name of the game. So we have to focus on executing, meaning doing, meaning putting into action, meaning putting things first that are important in our life. So if we have a great idea, it won't mean anything unless we actually start to make the physical steps, the choices, the decisions that will put us on that path. So it's a critical one we have to remember. And we just start one thing at a time, just one decision at a time, one action at a time. And I would say the most important thing is to develop ourselves. Execute developing your greater self. Have a great day, everyone.
In my book, I really hold out people in recovery from severe addiction as sort of modern day prophets for the rest of us, because I do think that people who have been addicted and then get into recovery do have a hard-won wisdom that we can all benefit from. And the wisdom, I guess, to distill it down, I mean, it's many things. But in terms of dopamine, the wisdom is there are adaptive ways to get your dopamine, and there are less than adaptive ways. And in general, you could describe the adaptive ways as not too potent, so not tipping that balance too hard or too fast to the side of pleasure.
So does that mean never allowing myself to be absolutely in complete bliss? Or does it mean not allowing myself to stay in that state too long?
The latter. I think the latter. So, and then that gets to temperament. So I'm going to get that to a second. So in general, what we want is some kind of flexibility in that balance and the ability to easily reassert homeostasis. We don't want to break our balance, which is possible if we overindulge for enough period of time and end up with a balance tipped to the side of pain, this dopamine deficit state we've been talking about. We want a flexible, resilient balance, right? Which can be sensitive to things going on in the environment, which can experience pleasure and approach, which can experience pain and recoil, right? This is all adaptive and healthy and necessary and good. We would never want a balance that doesn't tilt.
Right.
But that would be a disaster.
Right.
We wouldn't be human. And we wouldn't want that. It would be really, really boring. On the other hand, what people in recovery from addiction talk about is, to some extent, having to learn to live with things being a little boring a lot of the time, right? So trying to avoid some of this intensity and thrill seeking and escapism that really is at the core of addictive tendencies.
Sorry to interrupt, but when you say boring, can we add stressful and boring?
Yes.
So anxiety and boredom can hang out together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct in?
For sure. I mean, actually, boredom is highly anxiety provoking.
Okay, that's good to know, because I think people hear boredom and they think, like, oh, there's nothing to do here.
Right.
There's not, it's
right.
usually, I feel like we have a ton to do. We just don't really want to do it.
Right.
As opposed
right.
to something that we're excited to do.
Right. Okay. So this gets to sort of some of the core things also we were talking about earlier about finding your passion. So I'm going to try to link it all together. But basically is boredom. First of all, boredom is a rare experience for modern humans because we're constantly distracting ourselves from the present moment. And we have an infinite number of ways to do that. Right. But boredom is really, I think, an important and necessary experience. But it is scary because when you allow yourself to be bored, let's say you had that list of all the things you hate to do, but you actually got them all done. Imagine that. And you got your forthcoming book done and you did all your interviews.
It could happen. Lightning could strike.
Right. And you walked your dog and you cleaned your house and you went shopping. Imagine that for a moment. You would be sitting in your house and my guess is you would be terrified because, wow, what am I supposed to do now? Right? There's nothing I really have to do. And that is really, really scary. That can feel like free fall. And yet that's really an important and good experience to have. And I think that is an experience out of which we can have a lot of creative initiative, but also really consider our priorities and values. Okay, here I am on planet Earth. What the hee-haw am I going to do with my life? What do I really care about? How do I really want to spend my time when I'm not distracting myself, in order to spend it?
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more. And you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Anna Lembke, and my take on her top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, have a balance.
How often I grab my phone to distract me from difficult times, whether it's serious life challenges, I'll look at it because I don't want to deal with that in this present moment. From minor life challenges, like something scary on TV, I grab my phone because I don't want to look at it. And so, and you talk about all the different instances like escaping, drugs, alcohol, romance novels, binge watching Netflix, whatever it is that we do. Why does this only make our challenges in life worse, that we're not able to be in the present moment?
Yeah, great question. I think to really understand why we need to pay attention to this problem and why it's non-trivial is to understand the neuroscience of pleasure and pain. And the way that I explain this to my patients and to my medical students is I say, imagine that in your brain, there's a balance, kind of like a teeter-totter in a kid's playground. And in its resting state, unlike a teeter-totter in a kid's playground, that balance is level with the ground. That balance represents how our brain processes pleasure and pain, and they work like opposite sides of a balance. When we do something pleasurable or reinforcing, let's say in my case, I eat a piece of chocolate, my balance tilts slightly to the side of pleasure. I get a little release of dopamine, our pleasure neurotransmitter in the brain, and I feel good. But one of the overriding rules governing this balance is that it wants to stay level. It doesn't want to remain very long to the side of pleasure or to the side of pain. So the brain will immediately respond to that or adapt to it by downregulating our own dopamine production and downregulating our own dopamine transmission. I kind of imagine this as these little gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance to bring it level again. But the gremlins like it on the balance, so they stay on till it's tipped an equal and opposite amount to the side of pain, and that's the after effect, the come down, the hangover, that moment of wanting one more piece of chocolate. Now, if we wait long enough, the gremlins hop off and homeostasis is restored and we're back at our sort of level set point for experiencing pleasure and pain, and that's fine, then we move on. But if we continue to tap our phones or watch, Netflix or read romance novels or eat more chocolate, we eventually end up with so many gremlins on the pain side of the balance that they could fill this whole room. And when we've reached that point, we've essentially changed our set point for experiencing pleasure and pain, such that we need more and more of the pleasurable stimulus and more potent forms to get the same effect. And importantly, when we're not ingesting that pleasurable substance, our balance is tilted sharply to the side of pain. We experience the universal symptoms of withdrawal, anxiety, irritability, restlessness, insomnia, mental preoccupation with our drug. And it can stay like that for a very, very long time. So this is not just about tolerance and needing more to get the same effect. It's about the fact that when we're not using, we are essentially in a dopamine deficit state, right? We're walking around unhappy. I see so many patients coming in reporting depression, anxiety, insomnia, wanting me to help them. One of the first interventions that I make is to have them eliminate their drug of choice, whatever it is, for 1 month. And I warn them they're going to feel worse before they feel better because it'll be the pleasure-pain balance tilted here. But if they can just abstain for long enough, those neuroadaptation gremlins will hop off the balance and homeostasis will be restored, and they'll again be able to take pleasure in life's more modest rewards. So ultimately, the thesis of Dopamine Nation is that both as individuals and as a larger society, we have inundated ourselves with so much dopamine that we've reset our pleasure pain pathways to the side of pain, making it harder for us to experience pleasure and more likely that we will experience pain.
Rule number 3, understand the gateway effect.
This is just one of many typical examples of cases that I have seen in my career. And you'll note this one was in 2017. This was a 28-year-old male. He had a diagnosis of chronic pain. There was no known disease or tissue damage to explain his pain, but nonetheless he had pain from the top of his head to the tips of his toes. And he was on the following regimen prescribed to him by his purportedly very nice, and I believe it, well-educated primary care doctor. 40 milligrams of Opana, an opioid, twice a day, 30 milligrams of Dilaudid, an opioid, once a day, 60 milligrams of oxycodone, an opioid, once a day, 20 milligrams of Valium, a benzodiazepine, once a day, 65 milligrams of phenobarbital, a sedative, 30 milligrams of temazepam, once a day, and no list would be complete without 8 milligrams of Xanax, once a day. So this young man with no known disease etiology other than the endorsement of having a severe chronic pain, which I believe he has, is at imminent risk for overdose death with this regimen. Just to kind of put that in perspective, he's on 470 morphine milligram equivalents daily. The average heroin addicted person takes about approximately 100 morphine milligram equivalents daily. So all of this prescribed by a doctor, a good doctor, a well-educated doctor, and sanctioned by our modern healthcare system. Now we're in what's been called the second and third waves of the epidemic. What you'll see here is that approximately around 2013 or so, there was a spike in heroin-related overdose deaths. By the way, you'll note here, this is prescription opioid-related deaths, which has plateaued, maybe even gone down slightly, but is still pretty darn high, right? And then you have this spike in heroin, and then right here, synthetic opioids, especially fentanyl, which we know is 50 to 100 times more potent than heroin is. So what happened? How do we understand this? Basically, the first way to understand this is the gateway effect, that essentially Vicodin, OxyContin, Percocet got folks addicted, and the natural progression of addiction is that people look for more and more potent sources and cheaper sources. Price point really matters when people become addicted, and so they've gone from prescription opioids to illicit sources as those became cheaper and more available. Also, partially explaining this is the fact that as we have pulled back on opioid prescribing, individuals can now no longer get the opioids that they used to get from their doctor. Some of those individuals are now going to the illicit market. And then, of course, very importantly, the tsunami effect, right? Just the fact that all of those pills are in all of those medicine cabinets means that for some vulnerable teenagers, they just really have to get one prescription and try it once, and then they're off and running to illicit sources. So unfortunately, what we're seeing is that doctors, fearful of repercussions for opioid prescribing in the context of this epidemic, are now no longer being willing to treat some patients with pain. This was a study that was done where there was a Confederate who pretended to be the child of an older person with pain who called a Michigan primary care clinic and said, "Will you treat my father or my mother? They're on this opioid regimen." 40% of primary care clinics in Michigan said, "We're not going to treat your parent. We won't even see them as a patient." So this is part of the repercussion. It's gotten so bad, as you can see here, this is just another example of the fact that many high school students who get addicted to prescription opioids started with a prescription from their doctor. And here's an interesting statistic. In the 1960s, 80% of heroin users started with heroin. Today, if you interview heroin users, 75% of them will tell you that they started with a prescription opioid. Again, a very different phenomenology in terms of this epidemic. Okay, so what I want to do next is delve a little bit more deeply into how this happened.
Rule number 4, challenge the anxiety.
You've got this, it's a chart that has chocolate, sex, nicotine, amphetamines on it. It talks about how much dopamine is released with chocolate versus sex and drugs. And you also see that learning increases dopamine firing in the brain. So I wonder, where do healthier habits like learning or exercise fit into this chart? And should we be cautious of too much learning or too much exercise? Do we get the surplus with healthy things as well?
Yeah, great question. So how do we differentiate good dopamine from bad dopamine, or healthy adaptive sources of dopamine from less healthy or adaptive sources? The chart you're referring to has to do with an experiment where they placed a probe in a rat's brain to figure out how much dopamine is released in the rat's brain when it ingests certain substances. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which means it's a molecule in the brain that's intimately associated with pleasure, reward, and motivation. Neurotransmitters are the molecules that bridge the synapse between two neurons. So neurons communicate through electrical signals, but they don't touch end to end. There's a little gap, and that's to be able to regulate and control those signals. And that gap is bridged by little chemicals that are called neurotransmitters. Dopamine is probably the most important neurotransmitter involved in reward, motivation, and pleasure. It's not the only neurotransmitter, but it's probably the final common pathway. So measuring dopamine in a rat's brain with ingestion of certain substances gives some idea of how reinforcing that substance is. And as you saw, we all have tonic baseline amounts of dopamine firing in our brain. So it's not as if we have no dopamine and then we get dopamine. We're always firing a little bit of dopamine, and it's how dopamine changes either above or below baseline firing that creates our emotional states. When dopamine goes above baseline, that's the feeling of pleasure, motivation, reward. When dopamine goes below baseline, that's the feeling of craving, irritability, anxiety, restlessness. And what that experiment showed is that chocolate increases dopamine firing above baseline about 50 units. Sex is about 100 units. Nicotine, I think, is 150. Cocaine is 250. And amphetamine is 1,000. So you get some sort of sense of sort of relative reinforcing potential of those different drugs. Now, importantly, there's also this idea of drug of choice. So what makes your dopamine go up to 100 might not make my dopamine levels go up to 100. So there's also that inter-individual variability. But getting to your question about sort of exercise or learning, these are activities that are not immediately releasing dopamine with the initial stimulus. They come as sort of an after effect, which is why I talk about pressing on the pain side of the balance in order to reset our pleasure pathways to the pleasure side. So remember, repeatedly pressing on the pleasure side has the gremlins hopping on the pain side and basically resets our thresholds to the side of pain. But if we intentionally engage in challenging, painful, or anxiety-provoking activities, that is, we press on the pain side, then those same neuroadaptation gremlins will hop on the pleasure side to bring us ultimately to this point. So that's the good kind of dopamine. And typically that means, again, in small doses, doing things that are hard. Learning is usually effortful and hard. Exercise is usually effortful and hard. Exposing ourselves to things that we're afraid of is effortful and hard. And all of that in small doses is good for us, because then you don't get your dopamine from the initial stimulus, you get it from the opponent process stimulus. And one of the other experiments that I talk about in the book, which is kind of horrific to read because it's very inhumane to dogs, and it was done some time ago, but to me, it's a really fascinating experiment. Basically, they took dogs and they exposed them to a very strong electrical shock. So they pressed down very hard on the pain side of the balance. And initially, after the initial response, the dog was sort of wary and alarmed, defecated and urinated on itself, kind of horrible. But what's really fascinating is that with the second exposure of the shock, the brain compensated by tipping the balance to the side of pleasure, and the dog exhibited what the researchers called a fit of joy right after being released from the electrical harness. The dog bounced up and down, was happy, and that's not just like, oh, thank goodness, I'm no longer being shocked. That's actually a physiologic reaction to a stressor, that there's this opponent process reaction or this counter effect leading to, euphoria and dopamine. It's the same thing people get a runner's high or what have you. Now, is it possible to overdo painful stimuli to get addicted to exercise? Absolutely. And I see patients like that who run so much or exercise so much that they end up injured and yet keep going. That's a situation where you have too much of a good thing, even if it's, sort of a painful stimulus, can be bad.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, don't overindulge.
When we find something, or when something finds us, that we enjoy, that feels pleasurable, social media, food,
right,
sex, gambling, whatever happens to be, and we will explore the full range of these. There's some dopamine release when we engage in that behavior. And then what you're telling me is that very quickly,
yes,
and beneath my conscious awareness, there's a tilting back of the scale where pleasure is reduced by way of increasing pain.
Right.
And I've heard you say before that the pain mechanism has some competitive advantages over the pleasure mechanism, such that it doesn't just bring the scale back to level. It actually brings pain higher than pleasure. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what happens again? So the hallmark of any addictive substance or behavior is that it releases a lot of dopamine in our brain's reward pathway. Like broccoli just doesn't release a lot of dopamine, just doesn't, right? But what happens right after I do something that is really pleasurable and releases a lot of dopamine is, again, my brain is going to immediately compensate by down-regulating my own dopamine receptors, my own dopamine transmission to compensate for that, okay? And that's that come down or the hangover or that after effect, that moment of wanting to do it more. Now, if I just wait for that feeling to pass, then my dopamine will re-regulate itself and I'll go back to whatever my chronic baseline is. But if I don't wait, and here's really the key, if I keep indulging again and again and again, ultimately, I have so much on the pain side, right, that I've essentially reset my brain to what we call like an anhedonic or lacking in joy type of state, which is a dopamine deficit state. So that's really the way in which pain can become the main driver, is because I've indulged so much in these high reward behaviors or substances that my brain has had to compensate by way down regulating my own dopamine, such that even when I'm not doing that drug, I'm in a dopamine deficit state, which is akin to a clinical depression. I have anxiety, irritability, insomnia, dysphoria, and a lot of mental preoccupation with using again or getting the drug. And so that's the piece there. There's the single use, which easily passes, but it's the chronic use that can then reset really our dopamine thresholds, and then nothing is enjoyable, right? Then everything sort of pales in comparison to this one drug that I want to keep doing.
Rule number 6, don't monetize the work.
You could also say that someone who enjoys working as well, is that the same thing? You get addicted to the stress of your job? Is it the same idea?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, again, I think being very engaged in your work and finding meaning and purpose in your work can be a really good source of dopamine, but anything that leads to, you know, that kind of reinforcement loop has the potential to become addictive. And one of the points of Dopamine Nation is the way that technology has made all of these behaviors, including work, potentially more potent and hence more addictive. So for example, the way that we're now measured, the metrics used for work are often remote from the meaning of the work itself. So for example, you know, we may, for example, in medicine, we actually get metrics telling us how many patient hours we've billed and how much above our target, and we get graphs, and all of a sudden you can begin to monetize that experience in a way that's in and of itself reinforcing, that is separate from the actual reason for doing the work in the first place. And that can then lead to this kind of vicious cycle of compulsive overengagement or addiction.
Rule number 7, look around you.
One of the big problems now that's very misguided about this idea of finding your passion, it's almost as if people are looking to fit the key into the lock of the thing that was meant for them to do.
Right. And then everything will feel like a natural progression.
Right. And then everything will be wonderful.
Yeah, I can attest to the fact that is not how it works in any endeavor.
Right. And that you'll have all this great success, or, you know, and here's where I really think the answer lies. And I really, really believe this. Stop looking for your passion and instead look around right where you are. Stop distracting yourself. Look around right where you are and see what needs to be done. So not what do I want to do, but what is the work that needs to be done? And more importantly, it doesn't have to be some grandiose work. Like, does the garbage need to be taken out, right? Is there some garbage on your neighbor's lawn that someone threw there that you could actually bend over and pick up and put into the garbage can? Look around you. There is so much work that needs to be done that nobody wants to do that is really, really important. And if we all did that, I really think the world would be a much better place. And this is what people who have severe addiction who get into recovery realize. They're like, it's not about me and my will and what I'm going to will in my life or in the world. It's about looking around what needs to be done. What is the work that I am called to do in this moment? Which also is incredibly freeing because I don't have to search for the perfect thing. There's a lot of burden now on young people that they have to find that perfect thing. And until they've found that perfect thing, they're going to be miserable. You don't have to do that. Look at the life you were given. Look at the people around you. Look at the jobs that present themselves to you and do that job simply and honorably one day at a time. With a kind of humility. I think this is really what's so striking to me about the wisdom of people in recovery. There's this incredible humility that comes out of that experience. You feel so broken, so ashamed, but you pick yourself up one day at a time and you build a life that's around what can I do right in this moment that might benefit another person and thereby benefit me.
Rule number 8, watch the cravings.
What motivates the drug-seeking patient? For me, what was really revelatory when I first started learning about addiction was to learn something about the neuroscience of addiction and how the brain changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to condense like the last 50 years of addiction neuroscience into 3 minutes at a level at which I understand it. It will become immediately apparent that I'm not a neuroscientist, but here we go. One of the most interesting things that we've learned in the past 50 years about pain and pleasure is that they're co-located. So the same areas of the brain that process pleasure are the areas that process pain. And the way that pain and pleasure interrelate is that they work like a balance, okay? So I really like chocolate, so when I ingest a piece of chocolate, my balance tips slightly to the side of pleasure. But here's the thing about the balance. It wants to remain level, and it will work very hard to reestablish a level balance, or what is called homeostasis. And it does that through a process called neuroadaptation. Now, I kind of imagine neuroadaptation as these little gremlins hopping on the pain side of my balance to bring it level again. And that's that moment of wanting a second piece of chocolate, because the thing about the gremlins is they like it on the balance. They don't hop off as soon as it's level, but they wait till the balance is tipped in equal and opposite amount to the side of pain. Again, that's where I'm thinking, another piece of chocolate would be really good right now. If I wait long enough, the gremlins hop off, the balance reasserts homeostasis, and I'm not really craving another piece of chocolate. That's how it works, okay? Now imagine that instead of a piece of chocolate, my doctor gives me some Vicodin. And by the way, I'm in pain, so I'm not even starting out with a level balance, right? I'm starting out tilted to the side of pain. But the balance works the same way. Now I don't get a little bit of shift to the side of pleasure, I get a great big shift. Huge amount of dopamine in my reward pathway. The fundamental difference between substances that are addictive and those that are not is the amount of dopamine that they release in the reward pathway. So now I need a great big Arnold Schwarzenegger-sized gremlin on the pain side to bring my balance level again. But remember, it doesn't stay there. It slams down to the side of pain. That is called opioid withdrawal. It's extremely painful for some people. But you know, it lasts hours to days. Depending on how many opioids you took, the gremlin hops off and homeostasis reasserts itself. Now, here is the key piece to understanding the disease of addiction. If I take that opioid for days, to weeks, to months, to years, I have enough gremlins on the pain side of my balance to fill this entire auditorium, right? Because now my balance is working really hard to adapt to all those exogenous opioids. So if I can't get more opioids, if I decide my life is a mess, I want to stop, guess what? I slam down to the side of pain, and it doesn't just take hours or days for those gremlins to hop off. It takes weeks to months to years. And this is what we call craving. I am now walking around with this type of balance. I'm irritable, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm maybe even suicidal, I can't sleep. My life is a lot better. I got my job back, I got my kids back, I got my husband back, but I feel like crap, right? Theoretically, if I wait long enough, the gremlins hop off and I get a level balance and I can enjoy a piece of chocolate again. But maybe for some people, that doesn't ever happen, which is where we get this idea that we can use opioids to treat opioid addiction in some cases.
Rule number 9, try the 30-day dopamine fast.
Being aware of what's pushing us too far is important. And then when you find something that pushes you too far, you try your 30-day fast. And then can you explain your dopamine acronym that you have so that we know how to go through the steps?
Sure. So, I think the first step, the D of dopamine stands for data. And that's just trying to be very honest with ourselves about what is the behavior or the substance that we have a conflicted relationship with. Either it's led to problems in our lives, or we just know we're consuming too much of it, or spending too much time getting it or thinking about it or covering it up. And then being really honest with ourselves about exactly what the data are. How often are we using it? How much are we using? What are we using? what's the consumption level? Then the O of the dopamine acronym stands for objectives. Why do we use? What does it do for us? Does it numb us? Does it give us pleasure? Does it help with depression? Does it help us sleep? What is the thing that's driving our use? The P of dopamine stands for problems associated with use. So then being really honest with ourselves, like what is it that's not working? Maybe it worked initially and it's not working anymore because of this pleasure-pain balance. Or maybe it's still kind of working, but now we're lying about it, or our spouse is unhappy with it, or we're not able to be present for our children in the way that we want to be. And then the A of dopamine stands for abstinence, where we basically do a dopamine fast. We take a break from that substance or behavior for 1 month. Now, 1 month is the ideal because typically it takes about 10 to 14 days for acute withdrawal to resolve, for the gremlins to start to hop off the pain side of the balance and for homeostasis to be restored. And that's why I say a month, because by the time folks get to week 3 or 4, they're really noticing the benefits of not using. And that's the key, to get past that initial withdrawal and get to that point where you're like, I get it now. I was totally hooked and I didn't see it. But if you can't do a month because of work or whatever the circumstances is, you can't totally eliminate the device, for example, maybe just eliminate the apps that are causing difficulty, or some aspect of it that's causing difficulty, or maybe just eliminate it for a single day. I mean, even a digital Sabbath 1 day a week can be really instructive for folks. And then just quickly, the rest of the acronym, the M stands for mindfulness. That means really just sitting with those uncomfortable and restless feelings when we're in acute withdrawal and noticing, but not trying to change those feelings, not trying to reach for something to get rid of that feeling. This is a really hard thing to do. The I of dopamine stands for insight. This is where we become aware of just how addicted we are, or we were, something that's really hard to do when we're in it. The N stands for next step. So if we make it that full month, then we think about, okay, do I want to continue to abstain, or do I want to go back to using? And if so, how do I want to use? Most of my patients want to go back to using their drug of choice. They want to use less, they want to use differently. So this is where we talk about self-binding strategies and specific barriers that we can put in place so that we don't get caught up in that cycle of compulsive overconsumption. And then, when we give it a try, and that's the E of the dopamine, that's the experiment part. We say to ourselves, okay, I'm not going to drink at home. I'm only going to drink with friends. I'm only going to drink wine. I'm only going to have 1 glass. And we just see if we can do it. And, then a month later, sort of collect the data again and start again.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is avoid dependence.
Do you think if you're giving somebody something at a high enough dose over a long enough period of time, it's possible to addict anyone to almost anything?
Yes, I do think so. And certainly most people, for example, who take an opioid like a Vicodin or OxyContin or a Norco, who take that daily, will develop physiologic dependence on that, such that if they try to decrease it or stop it, they'll go into withdrawal. Now, physical dependence and addiction are not exactly the same thing, but there's a very high correlation between those two things. And in terms of what's going on in the brain, it's not really clear if there's a difference or what that difference might be.